Good morning, students. Now we are going to discuss on the history and format of Cobol program. As these topics seems to be an very important one from Unit 1 of your Cobol programming language. Whereas in history, we used to discuss on what are the various names that we have for Cobol and what are the various standards that we have in Cobol and what are the various standards and committees which has been framed and which has been used for the maintenance of COBOL program, and what are the various years the language came into existence for working purpose. So all these things which are included in history of COBOL program, and next to that you have format of COBOL program. So in format of COBOL program you will have a sheet named as coding sheet. So in those coding sheet there will be some various column with column numbers, and based on those column numbers and its usage we have to code that coding sheet. For example, the column 7, which is for to indicate the command lines in your program, you have to specifically you have to use the column 7 only to include the command line in your program. Similarly, you have some various areas and sections in the coding sheet for some specific purposes, so that could be used only for that specific purposes alone and not for some other purposes. So the coding sheet, which consists of some restrictions and procedures or rules that to be followed while coding your program. So we are going to see these topics in detail. The first one, which is about a history of COBOL program. So in 1959, the new language named Common Business Oriented Language was introduced, keeping in mind the business purpose applications. So for most of the business purpose applications, we need some language that to be used and that could process some business data. So with the idea of processing business applications, they developed some language and they named it as Cobol. And to maintain this language, there is a board of directorate named as Codacil. So Codacil, which stands for Conference on Data System Language, so which is going to be the programming language committee established for COBOL program maintenance, and a committee to keep COBOL in step with the times. So the first COBOL compiler comes to existence in 1965. So this is going to be the first compiler that we have, and then the next version was published in the same year 1965. So in August 1968, a standard version of the language was approved by the Standard Committee ANSI, American National Standard Institute. So the standard version was again modified in 1974, and the standard versions are named as ANSI 74 or COBOL 74. So you have some revision process in those standards, and then in 1985 they revised a standard and released a new standard named as Cobol 85. So these are some various things happen in the history of Cobol. So here you have to keep in mind about the abbreviations of Cobol and Codacil and the first Cobol compiler and the ANSI standards. So these are some key points in history of Cobol program. The next one, which is about the format of Cobol program. So Cobol is a high level language. So hence a Cobol program can be executed on a computer where you have a Cobol compiler. So the only requirements to execute a Cobol program is you must have a Cobol compiler with some hardware requirements in a computer. So this compiler which used to translate a Cobol source program into machine language or into machine object program, and this particular object program could be executed in a computer. And then here in the format of Cobol program, we are going to follow the coding sheet, which consists of some 80 columns. So in a line you're going to have some 80 columns in that particular coding sheet, and then the page number is coded in the column 1 to 3. So between 1 to 3 you could include the page number, and then the line numbers are coded between 4 to 6, and together these page numbers and line numbers are called as sequence numbers. So depending upon the type, and then the entries are coded both from column 8 or column 12. So you have two types of margin entries as margin A and then margin B. And then so here um, so there is a important thing that uh, these columns to be omitted. So from column 73 to column 80, which must be omitted and which must not be used for any purposes, and which could be used only for some identification purposes alone. So these are the things about column numbers. And then so these are the column fields that we have. So 1 to 3 for page number, 4 to 6 for line number, and 7 for continuation. And the column number 8 to 11 we used to call it as an area A or margin A. And then the column number 12 to 72 we used to call it as an margin B or area B. And the column number 73 to 80, which is going to be for identification purpose. So in Cobol we have some two types of entries as margin A entry and margin B entry. So margin A entry start from column 8, and then you have to stop with column 11, and margin B entry which starts with column 12 and which ends with column number 72. um, so an asterisk in column 7 indicates a command line, and the entry is not compiled by the object code, or which will not be considered by your compiler. So since the compiler ignores them, anything can be included as comments related to the code or logic, whatever that you are going to include within your program. So command lines can appear anywhere after the first line of your Cobol program. So these are the various key points that we have related to history of Cobol program and format of Cobol program. So students have to stick on to the rules that will be used for formatting of Cobol program. So you have a coding sheet, and then you have various column numbers, and each and every column numbers which is being specifically used for some specific purposes, and that to be used only for that purposes alone. And then you have some various margin entries. So each and every margin entries have its own purposes, and whatever the thing that we have to include and whatever the thing that we have code, we have to include those code in appropriate margin areas. Suppose if you are going to misplace the codes indifferent to your margin areas, and surely which is going to be results in error over there. So students, whenever that you're going to code a Cobol program, so whatever the rules that we have related to coding sheet, that to be followed strictly. So these are some of the important key points which is related to history of Cobol program and coding sheet of Cobol program. So with this, I'm stopping this session. So thank you, students. Thank you for listening. Thank you.